Okay, I just want to make sure we understand the sine function and how to graph it. Okay, so first of all, to graph the sine function, we're just going to use our unit circle. Remember that if you look at the numbers that are circled in purple, those are the y coordinates of the points on the unit circle, and the y coordinate is sine. So y is sine theta on your unit circle. So for all those points, the y coordinate is sine theta, whatever angle you're at. Okay, so if you just look at the quadrantal angles, you can kind of get an idea of what this function is doing. At 0, the value of sine is 0. So you have the point 0, 0 on this function, and then when you get to 90 degrees, you're increasing as you go from 0 to 90 degrees. And when you get to 90 degrees, the value of y is 1. So sine is 1 at 90 degrees. And then you start to decrease with your y coordinate. It goes from square root of 3 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, 1/2, and then back to 0. So it's coming down. By the time it gets to 180, it's at 0. And then as you go from 180 to 270, it's starting to go negative. So the y coordinate goes down to -1. And then as you start to go from 270 back up to 0 again, which is 360, y starts to increase, going from negative square root of 3 over 2, negative square root of 2 over 2, negative 1/2, and back to 0. So you're up there. And then on the negative side, you would look at the values it's taking on as it goes clockwise around the circle. So at -90, it has a value of -1. At -180, it's over on the left side, so it has a value of 0, and so on. So this is what the sine function looks like. It's a function that just goes up and down, and it repeats the same pattern over and over again, and that is just this starts at 0, goes down, and back up to 0 again. Okay, so that piece of the function, so it takes 360 degrees to accomplish all that it does, which is starting at 0, it goes up to 1, then back down to 0, then to -1, and then back up to 0 again. Those are all the things it does, and it just does that over and over and over again. We talked about the amplitude of the sine function. That just means the height of the function, the highest point the function reaches from the middle line. So the value of the amplitude is 1 for the sine function. And that 1, the amplitude, is the coefficient on the function for both sine and cosine. So whenever you're looking at a sine function or a cosine function, if you look at the coefficient in front of sine, whatever number that is, that's going to tell you what the amplitude of your function is. So for the sine function, 1 sine x, you have an amplitude of 1. So for the cosine function, you're looking at your x coordinates on your unit circle. X is cosine theta. All right, so what happens with the cosine function? Well, when you're at 0 degrees, your cosine has a value of 1. So the point 0, 1 is on the cosine function. So it starts, you can see that the sine function starts at the origin and it's on its way up. So cosine starts at 1 and then it decreases. So at 0 degrees, the cosine is 1, and then it goes to square root of 3 over 2, then square root of 2 over 2, then 1/2, and then back down to 0. So the point 90 degrees, 0 is on there. And then it starts to decrease into the negatives because you go into the second quadrant. And so it becomes -1/2, negative square root of 2 over 2, negative square root of 3 over 2, and down to -1. So at 180, the cosine is -1. And then as you go through the third quadrant, you are becoming, you're on your way back up to 0. So it's increasing, and by 270, it's back to 0. And then 360, when you come all the way around up back to 0, it is now back to 1 for the cosine. And so it looks just like that on the left side of the y-axis. So you can see that the cosine function looks exactly like the sine function, except it has been scooted over to the left 90 degrees. So the cosine function has its maximum value at when x is 0, or when theta is 0. The sine function has its maximum value when theta is 90 degrees. If we do something to each function, so look at the sine function here. I've got the sine function already graphed. Now we want to look at what does it look like if f of x equals negative sine x. So f of x equals negative sine x. That's just, you're just flipping the function upside down. So now, instead of when you're at the origin, it is going up on its way to its maximum. Now at the origin, it is on its way down towards its minimum. So the way you can tell when you're looking at a graph, whether it's a sine or a negative sine function, if it's passing through the origin on its way up, it's a positive sine function. If it's passing through the origin on its way down, it's a negative sine function. For the cosine function, it always starts at its maximum when x is 0 or when theta is 0. And so when you flip it, when you make it f of x equals negative cosine x, then everything flips across the x-axis. And now when you're at 0 degrees, the function is at its minimum value. So that's how you know you've got a negative cosine function if at 0 degrees, you're at the minimum of the function instead of the maximum of the function. If you multiply the sine function by some coefficient here, as I was mentioning before, that changes the amplitude of the function. It will make the function taller. Its maximum will be higher. So all the y coordinates are being multiplied by 2 in this case. So now, instead of having 90 degrees 1, you have 90 degrees 2. And so the amplitude of the function will be whatever that number is. So the amplitude of 2 sine theta is 2 instead of 1. So all you have to look at at this point is the number that's in front of the function. So in this case, we're going to be looking at negative 2 cosine x. So we know that this function is going to have an amplitude of 2. And it's going to be flipped upside down. It's going to be a cosine function flipped upside down because of that negative sign, and the amplitude will be 2. As you can see, it starts at its minimum and then goes up to 0, and then goes up to its maximum of 2, and the amplitude is 2. So all you need to pay attention to right now is whether you have a cosine function or a sine function, and the amplitude, which is that value of that number in front of it, and whether it's right side up or upside down because of the negative or positive sign in front.